The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of our guests and panel members and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution any member of the Nova Society is associated with. The material information presented on the Nova Society is for general information purposes only. Reproduction or dissemination for the purpose other than education is prohibited without express written consent of the Nova Society. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society, and today we again reach into the mailbag and we answer an email from one of our listeners, Marie from Texas. And Marie wants to know why the Nova Society does not have a strong conservative voice on the podcast. Marie believes that we are, the Nova Society, a liberal echo chamber, and that what we really need is a strong conservative voice to balance us out. So we took up this question and we asked ourselves, is this something that we need? And we came up with some pretty good answers, and we had a couple of questions for Marie. So let's listen in. This thing that I saw today was some elected official in Michigan took a picture at the airport of buses and airplanes landing. Mm-hmm. And he said that it was illegal immigrants getting a escort to wherever, a police escort on these nice buses.
What?
And it turned out when they investigated into it, it was the Gonzaga basketball team.
Right, on their way to Detroit. Yeah,
they were in Detroit to play in the NCAA tournament. And this guy made it like it was illegal immigrants showing up. Here's the Gonzaga basketball team from Spokane, Washington, showing up to play in the NCAA tournament. And when he was presented with this, he called everybody a commie. Oh, you must be a commie. It's, they're not serious. I mean,
no, they're not.
They're not serious. And I agree with Scott. I think it's going to be an absolute shellacking. Because today it's too early, still way too early, but when the time comes, people are going to see that they're not serious, and it's just going to be done, over, finished, no big deal.
Well, when you say it's not serious, I mean, it does. There are people who would go ahead and just believe him, and
well, yeah.
And I think are we going to talk about this mailbag thing?
Yeah, we can do the mailbag thing, sure. But yeah, we can do a little bit of this first.
There's just it's hard to argue with people. It's hard to, you can't really have a debate with people if they're not going to act in good faith.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big lacking right now.
Yeah, well, that's and that brings us to the mailbag question, because and that's a very good question. What happened to the conservative voice on the panel?
Well,
and
okay.
Mark and I had discussed it before, and Mark had brought it up before, when it was just Mark and I, and then I guess you, Scott, and Mark were talking separately, and then we would have guests on. And I don't know who suggested that we have a panel. I forget.
That would be me.
You suggested it was a panel, that we have a panel. And you, Mark, said, well, we should have a conservative as well. And I said, great. And I said, I don't know anybody. And you and I were just on the phone. Right. And Mark and I'm saying, I still don't know anybody. And I don't know anybody personally.
Well, eventually we may turn into the five. Who knows? Mm-hmm. I thought that Priscilla was a little bit more conservative than I am. But it turns out, and again, here's the email. Basically, hello, Nova Society. This week, the liberal media of MSNBC is losing its mind over the hiring of Ronna McDaniel as a contributor. What's up with that? Can't liberals handle voices from the other side? Liberal echo chambers, like the Nova Society, can't handle opposition opinions and are trying to silence our voices, which brings me to the question, why isn't there a strong conservative voice on your channel? All right. So, and this is from Marie in Texas. And I will say this, I get the mailbag, and from pretty much all, whenever they mention conservatism, Believe it or not, I'm considered the biggest conservative on the panel, which is kind of. I mean, which is kind of odd to me. I really didn't think that would happen. I always saw myself as really a down the middle moderate, but compared to the rest of the panel, I'm considered a conservative. So the question is, why isn't there a strong conservative voice on your channel? And it should be your channel, not you channel. But anyway, I won't go into the English under that. The fact is that give me somebody, give me a
Yes,
strong
please,
conservative
give us
voice
somebody.
that can make a logical argument and do so in good faith. And I would be more than happy to
Look,
extend out the panel from 4 to 5.
Mhm.
here's the I had two thoughts about this. One is there's no lack of right-wing voices coming out of audio devices everywhere, right? Whether it's AM radio or podcasts or Sirius radio or whatever it is. I mean, there's plenty of right-wing type voices. Second, whatever our political leading, certainly my political leading, I'm here not as a registered Democrat, which I only did in protest anyway to get my voice heard on primaries in Connecticut. But I'm here as an academic, not as a partisan. And if you can't find a lot of conservative academics, that may be a signal to you that when you look at evidence and empiricism and evidence, it tends not to lean conservatively. There, in other words, is with regard to Ronna McDaniel, she didn't act in good faith. She knew Donald Trump lost the election. It didn't matter. As she said, she took one for the team, and that is not somebody that we want to hear from at all. There's no reason to have somebody along who's going to be an exercise in groupthink and go along with the crowd just because the crowd is telling her that she should. And Ronna McDaniel thoroughly discredits herself every time she opens her mouth. It reminds me of when Bill Kristol, who's a leading conservative voice, whose father founded neoconservatism, who was a major proponent of right-wing ideals in the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, was hired by the New York Times to write a column to represent the right-wing viewpoint. And he made it for a year before they fired him because their fact checkers were going berserk. He simply never wrote anything that was true. And he didn't seem to understand that the same values that apply in right-wing circles don't apply in journalistic, and I am not a journalist, in journalistic circles and in academic circles. You need to have evidence for what you say. And if you don't have evidence, you need to shut up. And Bill Kristol was always wrong about everything. Right up until last night, when he had a hot take on X and wrote that it was a bad day for Democrats because here they have this elitist event at Radio City with Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, and Stephen Colbert. And on the other hand, Trump went out to Long Island to meet with the family or attend the wake of the police officer who was killed in New York. And all I could think was, man, once again, you got it all wrong. You simply do not seem to understand that Donald Trump using somebody as a prop in his own personal little journal is not a positive. It's never going to be a positive. The policeman who died, that his death diminishes us all and is a tragedy for all of us. But having Donald Trump talk about Jonathan Diller or meet with the family or use him as a prop. And I was thinking about what he did with Laken Riley's family, the woman who is a nursing student who was killed in was it Alabama or Georgia?
Georgia.
And he stood there grinning with his thumb up, with the family, and they were just being used in a photo op for him, so he can express his insecurity and his insanity in yet another way with another prop. I'm sorry. Was it Marie from Texas?
Yeah, Marie from Texas.
I'm sorry if you don't if you don't want to hear our viewpoint. The only thing I can say is that I'll back it up with evidence every time. I'm never going to shoot from the hip, and I don't think any of us are. Having somebody, bringing somebody in just because they have an alternative viewpoint, if they're going to sit there and go, well, clearly, Donald Trump had big rallies and Joe Biden stayed in his basement, and that means, that Donald Trump surely should have won. Donald Trump was losing that election from about maybe July or August on till election day, and he knew it, and he was writing about it all the time, tweeting about it all the time, how the election was rigged against him and so forth. He lost the election. More people have voted against Donald Trump than anybody else in history. And that is a simple fact. And if he can't handle it because he doesn't like to lose, he didn't like to lose the Emmy Award when The Apprentice didn't win an Emmy. He didn't like to lose Iowa when Ted Cruz beat him in Iowa. And he says every single time he loses that it's rigged against him. Sorry. It's there's no evidence of that at all.
And it's already starting now, because he made a statement already that the election in 2024 was rigged, which might hurt. I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive. It might hurt him in the fact that some Republicans may not show up because they believe it's rigged, so they figure, why bother? So what do you got, bro?
Right. There is no one. And as far as Ronna McDaniel is concerned, when Trump, who is the head of the Republican Party, says that he wants to execute generals and other people like Mark Milley, that people who are suspected of looting can expect to be shot while they're leaving the store. I mean, if until a person has actually left the premises with property that they have not paid for, the person has not actually stolen anything yet. Once the person has left the premises with the item that has not been paid for and is outside the premises, then the person has stolen something. But if the person is suspected of looting, then the person can expect to be shot. And what happens if the person standing next to that person is accidentally shot and killed?
But also, Brooke, we have a system here in this country. We don't summarily execute people
for suspected anything. But my point is that Ronna McDaniel said nothing. Absolutely nothing. She was silent about that. And individuals like Rachel Maddow and other people pointed that out and said, there's no one to stop Trump from saying anything except the head at that point of the RNC, which was Ronna McDaniel, and she said nothing. Well, there was no rebuke. There was nothing saying this is not what the Republican Party stands for. Nobody in top Republican leadership said, no, we will not have this. This is we don't talk about executing generals. We don't talk about executing people we don't happen to care for. We don't talk about this. We don't do this. This is not what a major American or the other major American party stands for. We will not have this in our leader. We will not nominate this person. Forget it. We're done. Goodbye. That's it. We will no longer endorse this person. He's out. We're finished. No one said anything, and Trump has continued forward as though he were the most marvelous and saintly man who ever breathed. And that is one reason why I think that no one who is credible and who has any reasonable ethical standard would want a Ronna McDaniel saying anything or being associated. I don't know what NBC was thinking. And now apparently the RNC is considering, who fired McDaniel because Trump wanted to install his favorite people, including his daughter-in-law. Now, apparently the RNC is considering taking legal action against NBC for having fired Ronna McDaniel. And I'd like to know how the RNC was injured by NBC's having gotten rid of McDaniel. I don't see that NBC really has any standing in this type of lawsuit. I think they just, or no, that the RNC has any standing in this type of lawsuit. So yeah, if, to answer Marie's question, we as a panel would love to see a credible, academic, conservative person who would have a viable argument, research and support and evidence, with whom we could have a mature discussion about issues.
Yeah. And
I mean, so yeah, and as I said, I personally do not know anybody.
well, first of all, when this email was written, this was when she was first hired. Since then, she has been fired by NBC because of basically the backlash that they got from many of their anchors that are on their programs. There is no doubt that MSNBC is a more liberal media outlet. No different than Fox being a conservative outlet, OAN, or Newsmax. There's no doubt that they lean one way or another, which, again, they're playing to the audience that they have, that they're trying to reach. As Scott pointed out, we are not going to bring someone onto the Nova Society just because they're a conservative. They have got to have legitimacy as far as they can back up what they're saying, as far as what they're saying. And again, we would much prefer to have an academic. And as Scott said, it's rather difficult to find a conservative academic, which should tell you something in the first place. The second thing is to consider that we're being a liberal echo chamber here on the Nova Society. We're really not. Now, if your definition of a liberal echo chamber is that we call out bullshit, then yeah, we would be then considered a liberal echo chamber. And that's okay. We don't always agree with Democrats. We don't always agree with some of the actions taken by Democrats. There's no doubt about it. But what's in the news today, and in the news cycles that we experience today, is constantly trying to battle against disinformation. And it's always important to remember there's a difference between disinformation and misinformation. We get something wrong here every once in a while. I mean, it happens. It just happens. That's misinformation. And we try to correct that as soon as we are aware that we've got something wrong. But disinformation is misinformation put out there for the purpose of manipulation. That's what it's there. That's what disinformation is all about. And what we see as academics and of people that have lived in the United States for quite a long time and experienced the United States as far as its government and its society, we try to call out disinformation so that the people that listen to us, and we are at like 400,000 subscribers, they know we're calling out the disinformation, and we back up calling out the disinformation with facts, using the facts that are at hand. And that is our purpose. We're not here to present a liberal agenda in no way. If by calling out the bullshit that comes from one side of the aisle is in some way promoting a liberal agenda, then so be it. Then my comment would be is maybe don't put out the bullshit, and we won't have to debunk it, in which case, again, the belief is that we're putting out that agenda. Marie, if you know any conservative academic, please write us. Present them. We would be more than happy. But we're not going to have somebody come on here like Steve Bannon screaming at the wind. I mean, that is not going to happen, because that's not what this is all about. So I think that takes care of Marie's question. Well, we thank you for that question, and it's a valid question to ask. It is truly a valid question to ask. I do know some conservatives. I know quite a few. I live in South Carolina. Let's face it, I know a bunch. But I don't think, and there's some down here, friends of mine that listen to this podcast, that would not be first in line to get on with us, because they know that they just can't say, well, everybody knows. Well, everybody knows that. No, everybody doesn't know that. And again, I spent some time with a dear friend of mine. He's a lawyer. He's very conservative. He's actually a Trump supporter. He listens all the time. And his comment was, I don't think I'd want to put myself in that lion's den. I just don't think. And I understand it. I got it. I truly do understand it. But so that's answering for Marie. Anybody else have anything else for Marie before we move on?
Yeah, I actually I do, because you mentioned conservatives, and look, when I was growing up, conservatives were people who cared about taxes, small government. I guess there was a component of hawkishness there during the Cold War when I grew up, and now I think conservative kind of gets used for Trump supporter. If I'm not mistaken, it seems to me that the definition of the term has changed completely, and it no longer has anything to do with political philosophies. It's simply, do you support this guy or don't you? And anybody who doesn't is a rhino. If they're Republicans, and everybody who who doesn't believe him is a communist, I guess this is the new thing. I don't know where that comes from exactly, but the term itself has kind of changed meanings, is almost useless. I mean, I have conservative friends. Some of them still think that the invading Iraq was a good idea. One of them thinks that Barack Obama is indeed a post-colonialist force, is hell-bent on destroying America. And all evidence to the contrary. I think Barack Obama left the country in a much better place than when he found it. I think that Joe Biden's going to leave the country in a better place than he got it in, and when he leaves, whenever he leaves. And the definitions have changed, and the Republican Party has become the party of Trump, and that's kind of sad, actually.
It is.
I kind of miss the good faith debates that we used to be able to have, but there's no debating somebody who thinks that because there was a rally that a lot of people went to wearing red hats, that means that the election is over. That's insane.
Yeah, I too miss the Reagan Republicans. Believe it or not, I miss the no matter what you can say about Reagan, and there was a lot to be said about him. At least he was sane.
Well,
even look at the two, what was it, Nixon, Kennedy, and they sat down and they were both wearing suits and they were polite to one another and they waited for one another to speak, at least as I remember watching a recording of the two. And it was, I think they were both sitting down, and it was very gentlemanly, and it was very courteous, and it was really very lovely to watch, certainly compared to what we have now. All the name calling and diatribes and nastiness, and no one can even finish a sentence, and just the rudeness. Yeah, and when all, or not all, but when an increasing number of serious Republicans say that they simply can't tolerate being in the House anymore because they're not getting anything done. The environment is intolerable, and there really is no Republican Party anymore. And they leave, don't even finish out their terms. That to me also sends out a huge alarm bell. We are losing, or have already lost, half. We have a two-party system. We've already lost half of our two-party system, and we need, as Mar has often said, we need a good, solid conservative party to balance out the liberal.
Yes.
Sorry, we need the voices and the debate and the collaboration that has dissipated, and that's very concerning to me.
And I guess I would say to Marie, last thing I would say is back to Scott's point, there's a different definition of what a conservative is. So I would say that if you're thinking that the conservative is Steve Bannon or somebody like that, that isn't a conservative to us. That's a fascist. So if you want,
go on, Mark.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to reassure Marie of something. Everybody wants our immigration policy to catch up with reality, and everybody wants the border to be secure. Nobody wants chaotic border. Nobody wants people streaming into the country illegally. But you would never know that listening to conservative right-wing radio or reading articles that they're writing. They say, they come up with the most outlandish things like Biden wants, people coming in over the border so they will vote Democrat, that kind of thing. And these are ridiculous ideas. We can agree that we have the same goals, but different ways of getting there, which is what we've always done. Where does the balance lie in taxation versus spending versus taxing the wealthy versus cutting spending? How many conservatives out there really want to work blue collar jobs until they're 75 years old or something like that, so that wealthy people can get a deeper tax cut? What sense is there in that? And I will tell you, Marie, and everybody else who's listening, the three of us are older people. We can do this job forever. Like this is pretty much, this couch is where I sit and do my work, and I can stay on this couch with my iron ass forever. And until my heart finally gives out. But I'm not carrying loads of bricks up any flights of stairs or anything like that. This is not a physically demanding job. If I had a physically demanding job, I would want early retirement, not late retirement. And and I just don't understand. I don't understand the obsession that Republicans have in these red states where their lives are so freaking miserable, where they can't get good health care, and where OBGYNs are leaving in droves, where they're afraid to administer basic health care to women, where gun violence is spiking to a point where, like, if you get into an argument with somebody, they're just as likely to pull out a gun and shoot you than they are to, have a spirited debate over whose parking spot it is. It's just like we're in an insane place in a lot of places in this country right now. And I really wish that we could get back to sort of normal practices.
It would be nice. And Marie, we're not beating up on you. Please understand that. I've flagged your email and we'll look for a response. Again, my question would be, define conservative for me, what you're considering a conservative. Give me a name. We'll be happy to reach out to them and have them on we're more than happy to expand this out to 5 or 6. Doesn't really matter. and continue to grow into that and have more of those voices. So that's it for Marie from Texas. Okay, so that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, the Phoenix Research Group, an independent research consortium offering social issue solutions to NGOs and international government agencies through multidisciplinary, nonpartisan, and unbiased research. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Podkite, who does all our analytics, iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source of music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershworth, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.